Okay, this is a controversial one that I've been putting off talking about, but I think it might actually benefit some people out there that maybe are dealing with similar things. Tack för sist, välkommen tillbaka. Welcome back everybody. Thank you for being here. Thanks for your likes, comments, subscriptions, all of it. I dig it. So, what I'm going to talk about today is Utah Mormons versus other Mormons. And this gets a little prickly and it's probably going to offend some people. That's not what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to point out something that really hurt my kids. Growing up here in Utah. Now I've said it many times, I moved from Norway to Canada. That's where I grew up, was in Canada. That's where all my schooling took place. The little town I grew up in was quite LDS. There were a lot of Mormons there. I'd say about a third of the town was Mormon out of 4,000 or 5,000 people. So there were plenty of us. I grew up in a very non-judgmental environment. Those that were Mormon, those that were non-Mormon, Catholic, Protestant, Methodist, Baptist, whatever, nobody ever that I knew judged anybody based on what their religion was. There was never any looking down their nose from any of the Mormons I knew, which was most of them, frankly. That's not completely true. There were a few that had looked down their noses. In fact, there's one guy, I'll have to tell this story. He was just a jackass and he just treated me very poorly when I was getting ready to go on a Mormon mission. I will tell that story sometime. And actually, there's one other dude too. So of course, there are always a few bad apples. But most people were very, just live and let live. There was no judgment. There was no, I'm better than you. Come join our church because yours is wrong. That just was rarely, if ever, spoken. Well, you know, I went to college in 1981 in Idaho, in Rexburg, Idaho. I ran into a little bit more of it there, a little bit more judgmental, because Rick's College is a Mormon school. It's now BYU, Idaho. It was a Mormon school then, quite strict, although there were plenty of ways around that, but let's just leave it there. And I saw some of that, but it wasn't too bad. In 1986, I moved to Utah pretty much full time because I started going to school at BYU. That's where I graduated. I met my ex-wife in 88. We got married in 89. And I basically have lived in Utah since then, other than a few years in Denver. So we raised our kids here in Utah. Now, with my ex-wife, I never saw much of this because my daughter was still very young when we were together. She was only 4 when we got divorced, 3 or 4. I guess she was 3.5. Anyway, so I never dealt with any of this then, but when I met my wife, we were coming up on 30 years this year, married. And she had a son that I adopted, and we had 2 more together. And then my daughter from my first marriage spent a fair bit of time with us. But we lived here in Utah Valley. I'm not going to name the towns because I really don't want to poke too much. That's not my intention here. My intention here is to point out something that's serious that a lot of people just don't want to even believe. And that's the fact that in a lot of these little towns here around the Provo-Orem area, and there's lots of towns, if you're not LDS, you can have a very hard time growing up. My kids struggled to have friends. In one particular town we lived in, which is north of here, they had a couple of friends, but most of the kids weren't even allowed to play with my kids. Talk about, that's not what the Mormon church teaches, by the way. That is so far from it. In my opinion, these people are horrible. People that tell their kids they can't go play with another 5 or 6-year-old kid because they don't go to church is awful. And I'll call you out there. I don't care. Be pissed off at me. Think I'm a jerk. That is being a jerk. My oldest son, who I adopted when he was about 3, we lived in a house north of here. I won't say the town. We had neighbors that were LDS. In my opinion, they weren't even good people. I won't get into that, but they were very LDS, very Mormon. My son is one of the friendliest people you'll ever meet in your life. He talks to everybody, and it was no different when he was a little kid. When he was 3, 4, 5 years old, he would go up to the fence, the neighbor's fence, and he'd stand there and wave and say, "Hi, hi." Completely ignore him. Would not even look at him. He'd do the same if he was out front and somebody was walking by. And I'd say more than half the time, they ignored us. The people across the street wouldn't talk to us. Those people wouldn't talk to us. The only friend I had in that neighborhood was another Jack Mormon like me. And if you don't know what a Jack Mormon is, it's basically a Mormon that stopped going to church. I don't consider myself Mormon. I'm technically on the book, so technically I am. So was he. He was my only friend. We would have a beer across the fence and sit and talk. Only dude, well, that's not true. There was one guy that was in the Elders Quorum presidency, and he was quite friendly to me, but at the same time, very judgmental. We literally had people tell us, not to directly to us, through friends, tell them their kids aren't welcome at our house because they're not LDS. Let that sink in for a second. We're talking little kids here, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9-year-olds that would have their hearts broken. That still gets me. Because how do you tell a little kid that wants to play with his friend, he's friends with at school, or she's friends with at school, that they're not allowed to go over to their house? Their friend is not allowed to come to our house because we're such horrible people. By the way, I know you don't know me. My wife and I are friendly, outgoing, accepting of everybody. I try to be as the least judgmental person I can. I'm not always perfect. Don't get me wrong. I'm not claiming to be some great dude, but I accept people. I don't care what your religion is. I say it all the time. I don't care what your politics are. If you're a good person, you don't treat people badly or hurt people, we can be friends. That was not the case there. It gets worse. So when we moved to our current town, we've been here going on 21 years now. When our oldest son, this happened 2 different times. When our oldest son was probably 12, 13, kind of in that really prime, making friends, getting to know people period of life, a bunch of the kids from the local ward, the Mormon church here, invited him to come to a pizza party. But here's the caveat. They could have I got it backwards. I'm sorry. Let me start that over. They invited him to come to church because if he would start coming to church, or even just to Mutual, which is like a gathering of the young people during the week, kind of a fun time. If he would start coming, their leader said they could have a pizza party. This happened to my son and the girl across the street who is the same age as him. Well, neither of them went because they weren't comfortable going to church. We aren't Mormon. And not only did those kids not get a pizza party, they were mad at my son and the girl across the street because they didn't get to have their pizza party because of them. Now we went, I didn't, my wife did. My wife is very timid. Not timid, that's not the right word. She is very non-controversial. She does not go attack people or, confront people. But she went to the bishop of this ward. Well, first she went to our home teacher and said this was happening. And he said, oh no, that would never happen. So now you're calling us liars on top of everything else. So she finally went to the bishop. And from what she said, he was, he listened and he was kind. And he said he would look into it. But as far as I can tell, nothing ever changed. My youngest son had a couple of good friends growing up whose parents were not, well, one was not LDS, and the 2 others were, but their parents weren't like that. They didn't look at us as some sort of bad person because we weren't part of that church. And I know I'm giving you fuel, those of you that out there are saying it's a cult. I get that. I still don't believe it is, but it hurt my heart every time this happened, and it was not once or twice. We We built a giant above ground swimming pool back here in this yard about 16 years ago, and 17 years ago. The second that pool was done, one of my kids, all of a sudden a whole bunch of kids showed up the day school got out, which is about the time we finished the pool. I'm talking a giant pool. It's the biggest above ground pool you've probably ever seen, with a big deck around it. All of a sudden our yard was loaded with kids. Probably didn't tell their parents. That lasted for about a week, and then it fizzled right back to where it was before. So what's the point of this video? Why am I telling you this? Well, one, I get pretty worked up when I talk about it, because it offends me beyond belief that somebody would think they're better than other people because of the religion they're in. And I know this is not just in the LDS church. This happens in all kinds of religions, where if you're not part of this religion, you're no good. And that's the message they got across to us. Now, my wife grew up in Southern California. She didn't deal with this going to church down there. I didn't deal with this up in Canada. When I was in Norway, I never saw this. I lived there for a year and a half in the 80s. I was there on a Mormon mission. People didn't judge other people because they weren't Mormon. You wouldn't have any friends, for hell's sake. So if you're watching this, if you're LDS, if you have kids that you're telling aren't allowed to play with the neighbor kid because they're not Mormon, I'm sorry, you're not a good person. You're not Christ-like. Christ would never say that. Oh, well, they're not the same religion as you. It'd be one thing if, I was some horrible person, I was always in trouble with the law. I was drunk all the time, or, I could see then if it was something like that. But we have a nice home. There's never anything like that, ever. In fact, if I would have a few beers on a Friday or Saturday night and the kids happen to have a friend over, I would hide it. I'd go out of my way to make sure to not make them uncomfortable. It was my home. I should have been the one being comfortable, but I just didn't want any kid to feel bad. And I also didn't want them running back and saying, hey, Mommy, so-and-so was drinking a beer. Oh, you're not allowed to go over there anymore. Because trust me, most of my friends now are either not active or not LDS. And every one of them has stories like this. Every single one of them has a story like this. So don't tell me it doesn't happen. Don't tell me I'm making this up. I lived it. I watched my kids go through heartbreak, which broke my heart and my wife's. It was tough. We debated moving out of Utah just to get away from that, so our kids could just have a normal childhood and have friends. They were all lucky. They had one or two friends. But when I grew up, I had a dozen or 20 close friends. And lots of kids around here are like that, but they all group together. And as they get older, they start making their own minds. Once they get to high school, then they don't listen to their parents as much. And I think they think, this is stupid. Why can't I hang out with so-and-so? Why can't I go on a date with him? He's a nice guy. His parents are nice people. I know I'm a little worked up in this video, but this is something I've been thinking about doing for a long time, and I think it needs to be said. And I think people, if you're like me and you had to deal with this same thing, I think you should speak up too. I think we need to say something. This is not okay. It's not okay to teach your kids because somebody is not part of your church, they're bad and you can't hang out with them. My kids have very limited dating options because when kids first start dating, parents wouldn't let them date the non-Mormons. I don't know what they thought was going to happen, because trust me, everything you think is going to happen with a non-Mormon happens with the Mormon kids too. I grew up in a Mormon community. Trust me, it all happens. You're not exempt from that because you're LDS. Kids are kids. Kids have the same feelings and urges no matter what your religion is. So don't try to tell me that that doesn't happen. I knew plenty of people I don't need to go into detail. You know what I'm talking about. I get so fired up when I'm not a fan of judgmentalism anyway, any kind of judgment, whether it's judging somebody based on the color of their skin or who they love or any of that. It all offends me. Political affiliation, all of it, that all offends me. I don't understand why we can't just be humans and get along. And if you're a nice person and my kid's a nice person, there's no reason our kids should not be able to hang out together. All right, I got a doctor's appointment in about 20 minutes and I'm gonna be late if I don't end this, but I could go on for a long time about this because I'm very passionate about it. I want this to change. I want Utah to be more like the rest of the world when it comes to this religion and not be so judgmental. And I'm not saying all Mormons in Utah are judgmental. That's not what I'm saying at all. There are lots of good people. But when it comes to that certain thing, it's pervasive. It's everywhere. Ubiquitous. Whatever adjective you want to use to define it. It's there and it's ugly and it needs to end. I hope I've got people watching this that have been in my shoes and also in the other shoes. And I hope we can come together and make our communities better, because it's better if we all get along. The community I live in right here, my neighborhood, is a good neighborhood. But my kids are all grown now, so I don't deal with that anymore. It's not fun. It's definitely not fun for the kids. It's very, very hard on the kids. And like I said, it broke my heart all the time. And sometimes I wish I'd have raised them somewhere else. Once we left the church, maybe I should have left Utah. And that being said, I love this state. I love living here. There's so many good things about it. This is one of the bad ones, and everywhere has some bad stuff, whether you're in Alabama or Texas or Alaska or Hawaii or California, Utah, Idaho, wherever. Everybody has some bad things and some good things. We have way more good things here than bad, but that's one that needs to be rectified. End of rant. If you got this far, I appreciate it. I would love to hear your comments and feedback. I will read them all. Even if you think I'm a jackass and I went too far, I'll read, and if you're respectful, I'll respond to you. All right, I hope you have a beautiful Monday. If you watch this on Monday, I'll try to get this uploaded today. Tack för denna gång, vi snackas igen snart. I hope you all have a great day. Peace, love.